All right. Did you guys get that?
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
So we're here.
Right.
We're live. Woohoo!
Yes, we are. Maybe a brief introduction.
I think that's great. Let's start alphabetically. Armand.
Oh, geez. That would be me. My name is Armand Baltazar, and I'm going to blather on about some cool stuff, hopefully, and have some fun with my good friends here.
I'm Iain McCaig, which comes before P. And I have known both of these gentlemen for a good long while now. This is kind of like a guilty pleasure because it's hanging out with two of my best friends. Colleagues, amazing artists, great storytellers, wonderful human beings, the kind you want to have those late night heart-to-heart conversations with, which is what this is.
And I'm Paul Tobin. I'm dialing in from Wellington, New Zealand. I agree with you, Iain. It's like, it's funny because last time at Lightbox, I was watching both you and Armand at a panel. And so it's a rare treat to actually join you guys for a chat this time around. So
welcome.
That should be great.
This was a long time coming and finally has happened.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right.
And it happened because Armand did all the hard work.
Totally. Yeah,
No,
we
it's
just tuned
true.
up.
It's true. There's always somebody that shoulders, comes in and does the Superman and lifts it all up. So Armand, thank you so much for putting this together, for wrangling the equipment, for making it go smooth and making us look good.
Yeah.
Well, I think you guys are you've got that well taken care of. And speaking of looking good, let me share this screen here and let us start. And always in a road, we start in the darkness.
Woohoo! Well, this is like the blank page. And you probably know me for these things. This what I fill up my blank page with, 41 years of it, 30 in the film industry, 10 as an illustrator. And I've been really lucky. I've had one of those blessed careers where you get to design a lot of icons. So Darth Maul and Queen Amidala, a lot of the Star Wars characters. I got to jump in on the new Jungle Book, which was the first animated film I'd ever seen. And I got to redesign those characters for Jon Favreau with a crack team, with Justin Sweet and Vance Kovacs and so on. Every day was a dream because I got to go and open the folders and see this gorgeous artwork by some of my favorite artists and then pour mine in there too. By the way, we're going to talk about that. Why do we do this? When you're surrounded by beautiful art, why would you want to create more? Ask us that later, Armand, if I forget. All right. Anyway, so this is what you know me for, but the reason that I do that stuff is this guy who I met when I was, I think, 3. I was supposed to be in bed, and instead I crept out to the stairs. My bed was up on the first floor, and I could peer through the bars of the stairs at my parents down below where they were watching a black and white version of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. And yes, I know this is Bride of Frankenstein, but still. And the monster came on the screen. And instead of screaming, I just met my new best friend. And I have always loved this monster. I don't know why. There's something about him that is innocent and gentle and yet unbelievably powerful. And that combination resonated with me since I was a kid. Actually, go to the next slide. There's another thing that I met about the same time. But these guys, I didn't like the children's books back then. They were all full of these, nothing wrong with them, but they're all full of these flat, simple geometric characters. And I wanted real stuff. And then all of a sudden out came these T cards for these prehistoric creatures. And I couldn't believe it. They were painted in oils. They were painted realistically. I'm only 5 years old, but it was what I wanted. It was fantasy made real. So that was it. I fell madly in love with dinosaurs. I think they're the first things that I properly drew, properly copied until I could draw them pretty good. And that with Frankenstein on the page, and I was set. I could tell all the stories I wanted, at least about those two. And then, of course, gave it away. I am a diehard Superman fan. I got a subscription to that when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And, there he was every week or every month. I think it was every week. He'd come in through the door and enthrall me. And, the stories were pretty basic. Mostly he was tormenting Jimmy Olsen and flirting with Lois Lane and stuff and saving the world. But I like the other side of it better. But I love the costume. I love the guy. I love what he stood for. I love that moral center to him. I know that sounds horrible today. Moral center. Everybody's so cynical. But there's really a power in choosing that right path. It's that moment where Luke says no to killing his father. To me, that's the most powerful exhibition of not just the Force, but something anybody can do. Just say no to the dark side, and it has no power over you. So anyway, Superman represented that for me. He's not from Earth. He doesn't have to help us. He's not getting paid. So why does he stick around and save everybody regularly? And I like to think it's because he sees something in the human race that's worth saving. And that always makes me feel like, well, then I should not give up on us too. Anyway, so those merged together and kind of formed who I am. Let's see the next slide. And who I am is this guy that just loves to draw. I love to draw alone in my studio. I love to draw in public. I love to torment young children in the name of Star Wars, have them pose for giant, many-limbed aliens. Actually, next slide, I like to do that to adults as well. This is one of my storyboarding classes that I gave up at the illustration masterclass, where I asked how many people loved the final show of Game of Thrones. And there weren't a lot of hands raised there. So I said, great, let's fix it. Because I truly believe that if you're going to criticize something, you've got to be able to make it better. Otherwise, you're just complaining. So here we are storyboarding an alternative ending to Game of Thrones. And yes, that is Daenerys on her dragon. So I know that this is what everybody sees when they look at me. They always go, why are you always smiling so much? And I wanted to answer that. I wanted to show what the creative process was like, because it isn't this. It's this. That was cute. Like this. Wait, music.
Oh, wait.
No, not that one. It's not this. It's no pressure. It's no, that's too much of this.
Oh my gosh.
That's okay. Okay.
I'm gonna fix this. I'll fix this later.
Please don't. It's this. Because when I create, I go up the stairs into the studio and I step into this other land, this creative realm where, there's hordes of deadlines pouring over the hillside, and there's muses flying above my head, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching and laughing. And there's me, this monster that's able to take on these kind of battles. And I pick up my graphite sword and I swirl into battle with graphite blood everywhere. And, you make it somehow. Magically, it all comes together and works. You never know if it's going to, and that's part of the magic of it. Blank paper, black screen, and yet voila, something happens. And then you got to start again with the blank screen. So I like to think it's kind of that Michelangelo thing where the images are already there. You just need to brush the paper away and reveal what's hidden. And actually, you do. Every night in your dreams, you do exactly that. All right, next picture. Anyway, I wanted to write a book that showed that. So here it is. It was called Shadowline. I made up an interviewer so that the person who supposedly is writing this book doesn't actually really exist. I invented him. And then I sent him on a trip to my studio, which is this otherworldly place that you can only get to by staring at a drawing. He meets the muses. Centaurine is one of those, but meets all kinds of muses, meets all kinds of deadlines and perils. He meets the monster. and he's desperately trying to get the interview, which he never gets. But his journey through my house, through my studio, is exactly what a creative idea would take going through my head. So you actually get to watch what happens to him as what happens to that idea as it finally becomes real by the end of the story. That was 14 years ago. And I was very happy with this book. It felt complete. There's an art class in the middle, little booklets. It'll teach you everything from basic drawing to professional storyboarding class. And in 14 years, I got a lot of really wonderful feedback on it from the people who read it and my fans and other artists. But I also got these emails that said, you know, I did everything you said. I followed your classes. I am now doing the thing I love. I'm getting a great salary for it. Why do I want to give up? And I got enough of those that I realized, oh, it's not done. You have to go back to the shadow line, and I'll tell you the answer to that one. So, next one. I had to find a reason to go back to these guys. This is my inner critic, Jones. He's the one who tells me I suck and you know, everything nasty under the sun. He's very valuable because he keeps you humble, but he's a real pain in the butt. And then there's little Bot, which is the guy who really does all the work while I'm sitting directing. Anyway, so I decided, well, that's what I'll do. I'll fire Jones. I don't really need him anymore. You know, I know that you don't either suck and you're not brilliant. You're whatever you are, the next drawing you do, and then the next drawing. You have to earn the right to be an artist. You don't just get it as a gift. And it's blood, sweat, and tears, but it's also this amazing magic and joy. And you have to leap into the void every time. So, next slide, I fired Jones. And here he is with little Bot leaving the shadow line. He's going to be looking for a new job. And that's what starts the second book. It's called Beyond the Shadow Line. So the revised Shadow Line comes out this year, this fall. It has an extra chapter now that actually takes you into the new story. And then I think it's either a year or two after that, we're bringing out Beyond the Shadow Line. And that will answer that question to you. Why do you feel like giving up? And how do you make that go away so that you smile like I do every day in the studio to the end of your days? All right. And then finally, of course, oh yeah, that's the interviewer going back to the shadow line with the secret story he wrote flying out of his pocket. But more on that in 2 years' time. And then next slide. There are other projects that I'm working on. There's one that you'll hear about at Lightbox as well, with the Gnomon Workshop. This originally a long time back, maybe 20 years or more, I did a series of DVDs for them, which became videos and part of their library, where I retold a classic story, Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid. And I showed people how to reimagine a classic in a different genre and make that story their own. So this is the Little Mermaid in space. And that was really fun. That let me create a story while you watched. And creating stories is what I love best. So I have a new set of videos for Gnomon now. They're on creativity. And I'm going to let you watch as I write an original story, not based on anything, and design the characters and the keyframes for that story. So stay tuned. And then finally, of course, I'm doing this book with my daughter. We've worked together for a long time now. Man. This is outside our door at Pixar, just so people know who we were. But she draws so similar to me and yet such a different person. She's so funny. So we decided, well, let's just challenge each other and do a book together. We won't really know what it is until we do it, but every day we're going to come up with something weird and wacky and put it in the book. And for Father's Day, we will release this book. Nice. So with a little luck, it'll be Father's Day next year and not next decade. All right. And then, of course, back to black or white. Oh, no, you can't show this yet. That's my secret.
Oh,
come
sorry.
back later for secrets.
Cut that out.
But
I'm going to cut that out.
It always ends on black. Back to black, back to everything's possible. Everything is imagination. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you. Oh, thank
Fantastic. Fantastic.
you.
Well, my name is Armand Baltazar, and I will continue the story that Iain has begun by sharing with you my story. I came to this country, the son of two wonderful people who were immigrants from the Philippines. And what was unique about my journey is that in our culture, in Filipino culture, becoming an artist wasn't something that was common, but I had this proclivity for wanting to draw on everything, draw on the couch, draw on the walls, draw on anything I could find. And my parents, lovely people that they were, encouraged me to do this and tried to provide for me the kind of place that I could. In this case, here's my first creation that they hung up on a wall. It's a plate that I was very proud of, and they were very proud of. And this is my first official piece that was ever hung in our house, and it began my career as an artist. And the thing is that I found myself very, very lucky to be able to find something I loved. And I think people who are tuning in today, who are listening to us talk, are probably same kind of cloth. You know, you love to create something. It's in you, and you just love doing it. So I went to school for it. I studied how to make stories. I studied how to make art, and I found myself falling in love with making artwork that told stories. It was like my two favorite loves, which was making images and making stories. And so when I went to school, that's what I focused on doing. Now, I had no idea that I would ever go into something like entertainment. What I wanted to do was to make stories and artwork for books. And strangely enough, 20 years of working in the film industry sort of led me into realizing my childhood dream, which was to do just that. So making these images about, telling stories ended up putting me in this really weird place where I was discovered by the movie studios by having my artwork hung up next to a men's and women's bathroom. And that's a story for another day. So I'm going to leave a little teaser there, right, for some other talk. But my break into the entertainment industry came because I hung up my artwork around a washroom, and the right people who had to go to the washroom that day saw it and gave me an interview. And in which case it ended up being DreamWorks Animation, brand new company. And that led to a 20 plus year career working for the animation studios. And I've been really, really, really fortunate. This kind of shy kid from Chicago, whose parents came from the Philippines, ended up getting to work for Steven Spielberg's brand new animation studio. And that led to other opportunities. I got to work for the Walt Disney Company and be a part of the team that introduced a African-American princess to the world, and then to join the team at Pixar to craft some really, really amazing stories. And while I was, on this kind of professional sort of journey to tell other people's stories, I ended up finding that I had the most amazing audience to entertain, to sort of tell stories to, who was very, very close to home. As a matter of fact, he was my son. And he asked me to sort of make a story for him. And in doing so, it kind of reminded me about maybe something I had lost along the way, which was my connection to the kid, like Ian's dinosaur. Like I had sort of lost my inner kid. In my case, it was an inner robot. And my son helped me to find that inner robot and to create something special. And this is what I created for him. And I had no idea at the time that I did that it would change my life in such a monumental, ground shaking, fundamental way. And what it was, I'm building this all up, but really what it was I loved being a kid again. I loved making images for fun. I loved making up a story. I loved telling the adventures of a hero who's got to, overcome the most impossible obstacles and win the day. And, when you're working as a professional, you're working so hard to be good. as an artist, as a storyteller. And it's easy to forget sometimes that you need to have fun and you need to be the person you always were when you were young. That's still in there, and to channel that. And so out of this one painting, I started a new career, a new path. I don't want to call it a career, a new thing. I fell in love with a new part of my life I knew was there, but had never really realized. And I started working on a book series called Timeless. And so now I continue to work in films and I help out on people's projects. I help out with their films, but I dedicate a good part of my time in telling the story of this young Filipino hero who just happens to look exactly like my son, and who's populated by a world of characters which just happen to look like all my friends and family. So taking a page from Norman Rockwell's book, I decided to sort of take from life my inspiration and to kind of fuel my passion and my stories. And I'm hoping as I continue on this journey as an artist and as a storyteller, I'll continue to bring that. Right now, I'm actually working on the continuing stories of Diego in my Timeless series. So as my son grows older, my stories evolve, and the stories I write for him and for the world to enjoy kind of evolve as well. But there's going to be more. So stories that I've created in the past that have been sitting dormant, other stories that I've been wanting to make are starting to percolate. And I'm going to spend the next few years forward is trying to bring out new things to the world. And so that's a little introduction to my journey, and we'll talk more with Iain and Paul, and you can hear a little bit more. But let's get to something really good here.
Skip that slide. Skip it.
Hey! I want that beard.
Yeah, we'll come back to beards later.
All right.
Okay.
All right, let's cue it up. Okay, so yes, I'm Paul Tobin. I've been working at Weta Workshop for about 20 years now, and it's a real privilege to hang out with you guys. So I guess my story starts quite some time ago now. For me, it's always been about a sense of adventure, adventuring and exploring in imaginary worlds. And so when I was a kid, my mum would buy me books like Narnia and The Hobbit, Half Men of O, which is a New Zealand fantasy author. And then also that kind of led me more into fantasy games, which is ironically where I first encountered Iain's work on those fighting fantasy pick-a-path books. And my, lifelong love of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. And then I sort of paralleled that love of the fantasy world and imaginary worlds with a love of exploring our own world and sort of different cultures and different ancient histories. And so I spend a lot of time traveling the globe, having some adventures there. And I guess if I'm honest, both of those two interests kind of combined in my love of films. And I mean, I grew up on Star Wars. I was obsessed with it. And then I was obsessed with Indiana Jones. And I think between those two things, it was really what got my interest in filmmaking and telling stories and my love of games. It all sort of came together. And I guess when it came to things like Indiana Jones, it sparked an interest in archaeology. And I actually started doing some archaeology abroad. And with Star Wars, for me, I finally had a chance to visit the Forest Moon of Endor. It's also the place where I proposed to my wife, Claire. And, in terms of life imitating art, we had a chance to kind of have some fun on our wedding day out at Weta, actually using some of the things that I helped design in the film. So I guess for me, it's always been a bit of an adventure and just trying to really enjoy the process of creating. Alrighty, click to the next one. So I think for me, a big thing has always been following your dreams and passions. And I think I've been incredibly blessed in that respect. However, when it came to art, it was something that I loved doing, but I was not actually particularly good at. And so I failed getting into art school 3 times and actually decided to take a break from art. And I did a degree in ancient history, which was kind of the closest I could do to archaeology growing up here in Wellington. And so when I sort of did my traveling abroad, I kind of reignited my interest in doing art again. I tried working, getting a bit better. I also became really interested in photography. And then that led me to come back to New Zealand. And weirdly enough, there was this little film being made called Lord of the Rings, which was so bizarre to spend all that time abroad and then come back to your hometown and have Lord of the Rings being filmed literally just around the corner. And the weirdest thing was that my childhood hero, in terms of artistic heroes, Alan Lee and John Howe, were working right there as well. And so that kind of re-inspired me to try to get into making a career in art. And so this was my final year project at design school, which was taking my favorite book growing up from the New Zealand author Maurice G and turning it into, I think we'll call it a tailor-made portfolio for Richard Taylor at Weta Workshop. And so that, we can transition to that. That led me to, I was very fortunate in that I did manage to get an interview with Richard out at Weta, and it was probably the most nervous sort of 20 minutes of my life. But it was amazing, because basically he sort of said, well, we'll give you a 2-week trial. And 20 years later, I'm still doing my 2-week trial, I guess. I'm still so I think for Weta, for me, was, it's been a huge part of my career. And I think for me, other than the obvious thing of it finally sort of unleashed the ability for me to start to learn off some really talented people. So I felt like I finally started to get some ability to design, to take what was in my head and actually get it onto the paper and visualize it in a way that I always hoped I could, but struggled earlier. But for me, the greatest take home from Weta has been the love of the creative journey versus necessarily the creative outcome. Because I think working in the film industry, you work on so many projects and so many of those stories never actually come to light. But that doesn't mean you can't have an incredibly rewarding experience with your friends trying to make those stories a reality. And so for me, that was that's been one of the really important things that I've sort of taken out of my time at Weta. And obviously, getting a chance to dip into my childhood passions. Like the first job I was working on was Narnia, which was the first fantasy book I ever read. And then a few years later, I get a chance to work on The Hobbit, which was probably the second fantasy book I read. So it's pretty incredible to be able to be in a situation where you're, taking those childhood passions and actually making them a reality. Okay, pop to the next slide. While I was at Weta, the cool thing with Weta is we do a lot of different things. We don't just work on film. We work on a wide range of kind of projects. And I had a chance to, with my friend Daniel Falconer and a bunch of the other designers and Kate Jorgensen, who was managing the design studio at the time, we had an awesome opportunity to start to dip into books. And in fact, I was a huge fan of the Star Wars prequel books. Me and Daniel were obsessive collectors of those books. And we always lamented the fact that we couldn't maybe do something like that for Weta Workshop. And so I had a really lovely opportunity to be involved with bringing some of those books to life with my friends, which in that case gave me some really cool skills, which we'll talk about later on, to tap into. The other thing was it gave me a chance to connect with some games. We had this interesting opportunity where we were given the opportunity to create a whole new IP, which was an amazing opportunity because usually we work on other people's IP. But it was for a board game called GKR, Giant Killer Robots. And so a small group of us were given the chance to actually build a whole world for this board game, which was, I'd have to say, one of the most satisfying and one of the most challenging jobs I've actually ever worked on. Okay, pop to the next one. And so while I've been at Weta, I think one of the other things about it has been making connections with some really great people. And for me, I'm not the most prolific artist. And so for me, one of the ways I've tried to achieve more out of art is to collaborate with other artists. And a whole bunch of us at work one day were complaining about the fact that we never had the chance to do the book that we wanted to do because we never had enough time. We never had enough content. And so I decided to create a little art collective called White Cloud Worlds, which was probably nearly 100 artists towards the end, which was basically us taking our own worlds and putting them into a book together. So we could finally get it into a book. And through that journey of making those books, it took me to America, and where I met Iain for the first time at Comic-Con, and then it took me to Spectrum Live in Kansas because I was invited by Athy and Carney Fenner to go there. And for me, that was the game changer. When I got to Kansas, I got to Spectrum. That's where I met Armand and so many of my American friends and heroes, really, artists, and also artists from as far away as Denmark, Paul Bonner, and the UK as well. And so for me, that set me on a different path, because now I wanted to take that experience and bring it to New Zealand, because New Zealand just didn't have any of these kinds of industry conventions for people doing imaginary worlds. And so I with some friends, we created a thing called the Art and Industry of Imagination. And that's when I started to bring some of my friends like Armand and Iain to New Zealand to try to recreate what I'd experienced in the US. We did books, we did galleries, we did educational workshops. But I think the great thing was we just made some really great friends and had some great times. Okay, next slide. So, in more recent years, I've started to explore some other opportunities, creative opportunities outside of film. I set up my own board game company with Nicola Booth, who was our production manager on GKR. And so we set up a little company called Arcus, and we just released our first board game this year called Shelfie Stacker. And we're currently working on a little Halloween board game, which is with my wife, Claire, which has been super satisfying. And if we just pop to the last slide, the final thing, a bit like, I guess, both of you two, I've got a sort of secret, that's been quite a secretive passion project in my case. I've been working on this for over 10 years, constantly never happy with what I'm doing and constantly reinventing it. And at the moment, I'm starting to get closer and closer to finally being able to release some work. But it's taking everything I love about my love of ancient history and travel and exploring and storytelling and trying to bring it into a reimagined version of Atlantis. So this is some of the work that I've been working on for the last 10 years, showing Iain occasionally when I get the chance, or I'm on for some feedback.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is where my heart truly lies at the moment, is trying to bring this world into reality. Right, that's me.
Woo! Good job.
Fantastic. Woo! All right, let's see here if we can't. All right. Let's bring us all back. And there we are, with the three amigos.
Hello. Wow. but really, it is about that, isn't it? Right? The older I get, the more I work in this industry. It's about working with people you love to work with on projects that really genuinely inspire you. And there was nothing wrong with the 40-year career being an actor in someone else's film, being an artist cast for, your part you could play in a Star Wars or a Harry Potter, whatever. I don't regret any of that. And I think if that's all you want to do as a career, it's an awesome career. I was trying to find an analogy for it. And it's like there's singers and there's songwriters and there's singer-songwriters. One is not more than the other. They're just different jobs. The reason I do what I do is that not doing it is unthinkable. I can't imagine not doing this, right? It's not for money and fame or anything like that. It's just like, but I would blow up.
Compulsion.
Right. Yeah,
literally
right.
A compulsion.
So what compels you, Paul and Armand, to actually do this?
Armand?
What's interesting about what you said, Iain, is that, when you're young, you have ideas about what you think you want, right? And your analogy of being a singer-songwriter, when you're young, you don't really know the difference between what it would be like to just be a songwriter, what would it be like to just be a singer, what would it be like to be both, right? You don't have a perspective. And what ends up happening is life happens, right? You grow, you change, you evolve, you try things. When you're a student, you're like, I want to be like this artist. So you try to be like this artist. I want to be like that artist. You try to be like that artist. I want to work on this kind of film. So you do. And what I end up finding for me is, boy, it actually takes a little bit of time just to get to know who you are, just to get to know what you like and what you don't like. Maybe it's not so much what you don't like, but maybe what feels more of like what feels more you kind of thing. Right. And so what I take from the 20 years that I've worked in film was what an amazing opportunity to sort of make a living, to make a career, to have adventures, and to get to learn who I am and what I might be able to do with that time, kind of thing. And for me, that's sort of what it's been like. Where I am now is come from all these great things that actually took me growing up, and it only happened as fast as it could happen, no faster, was what I ended up finding out.
Yeah.
Not the same you as the one that started, right? And you won't be the same you when you're my ripe old age. We change and evolve. That's important. Right. So it's good that you follow your path, because your path is not going to be where you were. It's going to take you somewhere else. Is that right, Paul? Is that what leads you?
I was thinking, we were talking a lot about this at work a few years ago, because we were trying to resolve some issues within the studio around how do we keep people invested in creating, right? It's not like a tap where you can just turn it on and off. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we kind of came to the conclusion of, it sounds really obvious, but it's like there is a life cycle to being an artist, and you're at different, you need different things at different stages of your journey. And that's a very personal experience, but in some ways, I think there is a little bit of a commonality to it. When you first start out, you're eager to learn as much as you can, because you kind of need to. You don't necessarily have those skills to express some of the ideas that you have in your head. And then I think as you progress further into that life cycle, other things become important. Things like family, for instance, becomes a really big part of it. Mm. And so you may end up sort of staying in the job because you kind of need to, right? There are other considerations outside of that. But I think for me personally, I think one of my time in the industry, the greatest thing I got out of it is that I finally met a group of people that would share what they know without any strings attached, so that I could finally become a better artist, so that I could get to a point where I could start to explore those worlds in my head in a way that started to satisfy me. Because I think I spent a lot of my career being frustrated by my lack of ability, my visual ability, not my imagination, not my ideas, but just the ability to get them down. And I think the other thing is, when you're working with some world-class talent and meeting and befriending world-class talent overseas, you start to realize how challenging it is to try to lift yourself into that kind of area. And so for me, that's been the big thing, is just having those people support you into achieving a level of mastery that you can start to shift from being, as you were saying, helping other people realize their dreams, like a Peter Jackson or a James Cameron, in my case, is the big franchises I've worked on, to actually starting to realize something of your own making. So that's kind of my little spin on that, I guess.
It's funny what you say about family being important. When I was 4, according to my brother, I drew a picture of my family, not the one I had, the one I was going to have.
Oh, cool.
I drew this long, dark-haired woman and this boy and this girl. And he points out just how amazingly they actually look like the family I got. So whether that's the quantum physics of I'm making this reality happen, or just plain coincidence, it's always been, the magic to me wasn't drawing people, it was making people. For real, right? How awesome is that? And I knew that there were 2 things that I wanted to give to my kids since I was a little kid. And the first was always share the adventure, right? I didn't want to be that mysterious dad, and I know life's full of good and bad things, and I didn't just want them to hear the good stuff, but I want them to hear the whole tale so they can cheer and get a glimpse of what's ahead for them, right? And the other thing was, I didn't want to teach them that when you have a family, you give up your dreams for your kids, because I don't believe that. I think you have kids to share your dreams. So it's really important to me to live the life I want my kids to have, to show them that if I want to write a story, if I want to suddenly branch off into the complete unknown, that's okay. Not only is it okay, but look, it makes me smile. It makes me happy. And I still take care of you. I still meet my responsibilities because you can do both. So anyway, that's family to me. Family is part of the magic juice that makes me smile every day.
Yeah. I mean,
Armand was in the drawing, right?
I mean, Armand, you literally kind of brought your family into a story. Like that's been so much of your last few years in terms of that sort of progression.
You know, what's interesting, like two things sparked in my head just listening to you guys talk, you know, bringing up these topics. And let me touch upon the first one that Iain said, and I'm going to touch upon the second one. Even both of them were just awesome. The thing that Iain was talking about with, you know, finding this strength, like coming from your family, or maybe just finding the place to create from. I had this teacher in school, right? And I used to pester him all the time. Can you help me be a better drawer? How can I draw better? How can I draw better? His name was Steve Houston. Who, if you don't know him, he's an amazing draftsman, right? And I would literally be tugging on his sleeve going, how do I do this? Why did I do this wrong? Why did I blah, 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 right? And he looked at me flabbergasted. He goes, Armand, look, you're going to keep working. You're going to keep drawing, and you will constantly work in becoming a better draftsman. Don't forget to put some effort into having something to say. And I looked at him as a young kid going, something to say? Man, I just need to be able to draw it great. I want to be a great draftsman. That's all I care about. I just want to draw great. I want to draw great. You know, and then years later, when my kid then asked me, Dad, can you make a story for me? You know, I had never thought about actually something I wanted to say because I've been so focused for many years on like being great at something. I want to be great at drawing. I want to be great at painting. I want to be great at designing something for your film. And when my kid asked me, it kind of reminded me of what my teacher sort of told me. It's like, let me cut to the chase, is you have value in you. What you have to offer is of value, right? And here's my kid looking at me going, Dad, make something for me because I value it, right? And all of a sudden, worlds collided, right? Worlds collided, and I was never more brave. Like I've done artwork for Steven Spielberg and shook in my boots, but I was never more brave than wanting so desperately to make something that my then 5-year-old son would go, oh man, you know? And that was the kind of the moment that my family helped me tap into something that was so powerful and yet so simple, you know, just out of the pure love of wanting to make something good and forget about how everyone else is going to perceive you and all the rest. And suddenly Steven Spielberg wasn't nearly as scary as being able to get a smile out of my son's face or being able to go like, Dad, that's a cool dinosaur, or Dad, no, that robot's not cool enough, you know, kind of thing. And that's sort of like what helped put me in perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul, I wanted to kind of address what you're saying there about not feeling that your drawing and painting talents were where you wanted them to be. That's such a good thing. You don't understand what a gift that is. Because what it actually says is, I can imagine better than I can create at the moment. If you don't have that vision of what's up ahead, of what you're striving for, there's nothing to pull you towards it. So the fact that you've got that love inside you makes you want to struggle harder to learn the techniques to just convey it, right?
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things, like I mean, all of us have done quite a bit of teaching, I think, over the last few years, and I spent a lot of time teaching, and I get, you know, I've met a lot of students that were just like me, that are frustrated at where they're at with their drawing and their skills. But if there's one thing that, and this is also something I've certainly picked out of my time in the industry, that if you just focus exclusively on the technical, it's kind of like a bit of a dead end, actually, because ultimately you want to be drawing on a very rich life experience or passions as well, you know, things that you're passionate about, because that's going to fuel the ideas to create great art. And I think in some ways, I think that's the only challenge these days is with the industry becoming so specialized and a lot of pressure on people to come up with the greatest sort of thing for Instagram or whatever. I kind of feel like people need to just remember that a large part of being an artist is just living a really interesting life and drawing on those inspirations and folding those into your work. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, and I just can't believe how fortunate I've been in terms of the things I've dreamed of doing as a kid and how that's then flowed into my career. It just, I look back on it sometimes and I kind of can't believe it. Like me as a 13-year-old kid sitting in bed playing Death Trap Dungeon with my dice under my sheets at 1 a.m. because my parents are wanting me to get some sleep. And I'm looking at these amazing illustrations, having this adventure. And then fast forward a few decades later, and I'm now sitting at a table in Seattle with the artist from that book, drawing at a restaurant, drawing on a piece of brown paper as we're goofing off, drawing while we're waiting for our lunch to turn up. And I'm thinking, what kind of bizarre alternate reality does this happen where you can have those kind of connections from, you know, those dreams as a child and where they can lead to you later in life? And that's just one example. I mean, it's quite bizarre how amazing you can start to kind of try to create creative opportunity in your journey through life if you stay true to those passions. I think is a big part of it.
Sometimes a good thing to do is to imagine this thing you want so bad, right? This ability or the craft, whatever it is. Imagine your habit today, right? Just jump ahead in time. Now, what are you going to do with it? And if you can answer that question, now go back and learn your craft. Yeah. That'll give you a North Star. That'll give you the passion to go and actually do it. We call that the genie wish. You know, if you could have anything in the world, genie just popped out of the bottle. Hey, what can I do for you? What would you ask? And after world peace and getting rid of COVID, and all that, what would you ask for yourself? And make a list of all the answers that occur to you. Because at some point, you're going to be lying on your deathbed, looking back over your long and happy life. And if you don't know what made it long and happy, you won't know what to do in your life. So make that list and get busy doing one of those every day, so that when you get to that final chapter, you're just laughing silly in the bed because you had such a good time. And you accomplished the stuff you wanted to, right?
I think that's also one of the greatest challenges, but one of the greatest things, I guess, again, about sort of the industry we're in is so much about what we do is about creating. You're constantly creating. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, one of the more interesting aspects of being an artist is not just limiting yourself to just being one kind of artist. Like some of my favorite artist sort of heroes growing up, like Alphonse Mucha, you know, they did everything from designing furniture through to costume, through to designing interior buildings, you know, and then they were fine artists and illustrators. And I think for some of us in the film industry, it feels like the same thing. It's like one day you're designing a spaceship, the next day you're designing a castle, the next day you're creating a hero. It's just an incredible opportunity to sort of be able to dip in and out of all of these different interesting areas. Yeah, I sort of feel like, for me, that's part of the excitement, is this constant ability to be able to shift around into different aspects of being a creative, not limiting yourself to just one thing, I think.
You know, what's interesting, though, too, and this is the comment on, when you were talking about your life, Paul, and seeing your slides and seeing all the places that you've journeyed to and been to, and your love of archaeology and old cultures. And Iain, my God, you're, I think, the Renaissance explorer that my inner child has always wanted and will be. So this is what I'm aspiring to, right? But the thing is that, like Paul, all the things you're talking about, right? There is a separation in the kind of artists that work in entertainment that embrace that life is what feeds you, versus others that have not yet seen that. And what I'll say to this is this, you know, because it's an industry, because it's a business, we're in the business of creating solutions for people's stories, right? And those that have actually gone out and sought to live life more, to experience culture, to experience history, to enrich themselves, they come up with unique combinations of solutions that are unique or more unique, or they're blazing the trail. And those that don't sort of understand the beauty in that will oftentimes resort to retreading solutions that have already been created by those who've actually gone out and tried to earn those life experiences. So the stuff that you've done, the stuff that Iain constantly lives, and the things that I try to aspire to is in that. And Iain, you had this thing you were talking about at your deathbed and looking back. You know, I used to fear, and we were talking about this earlier, whether or not this would come up, but I think there is a good thing in that life. There is an end point, right? Because it gives you value. It makes you go, wait a minute, I've got this chunk of time. What am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with it? Right?
It makes the choices you have, it gives them meaning, because you can't have it. So you actually need to choose. And if you don't choose, it will be chosen for you. And so much better to drive the ship than to be sitting in the back of the bus. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, Paul, the fact that, you know, you're like, oh, got to be better. I wake up every single day feeling that way, you know, every single day, you know, and when I look at social media and you're bombarded by just like, look at this fantastic drawing, look at this fantastic painting, look at this guy doing a demo while his hair's on fire and he's doing it over his shoulder, you know, and doing a dance.
You saw that one?
Right? Yeah. It's like 10,000 likes in 5 minutes. I'm going, oh my gosh, I can't draw a straight line. I can't get a cylinder in perspective without drawing it 15 times. I'm going, I can't light my hair on fire. In my mind, I could, but I can't, you know? And the thing is, it took me a while to figure out that's okay. Because you know what? Maybe no one else is coming up with an adventure about a Filipino kid fighting dinosaurs and robots and traveling through time in quite the way that I am. And maybe it won't affect 10,000 people in 5 minutes, but maybe it'll affect 10 kids at the right time, at the right place, right when they need it to. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I can live with that. I can live with my drawing getting a little better tomorrow, maybe a little worse, then a little better. You know, and I think that's where you're at. I guess what I'm saying is that you're in a great place and you're amongst friends. And I'm going to out Iain McCaig here, but every once in a while, he has a bad drawing too, you know, kind of thing, right? I know.
I always insist on starting with bad drawings. Get the crap out of the way first, so all the good stuff can come out. Yeah.
Actually, Armand, you touched on one thing there, which I'm curious, and I've always wanted to ask this question of both of you, particularly Iain, actually. But you were talking about how you can reach, you know, if you might just reach 10 kids, right? Your what you're creating has kind of created kind of like such an impression on someone that it kind of sends them down a different journey. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer, because I've kind of sort of see it played out a few times, and it played out with me, where you've had an experience with, say, an artist, and it might even just be a very fleeting experience, but it's enough that you literally now are doing you've completely gone down a different path. And I'm just curious to know, say, Iain, was there an artist when you were growing up? Did you have an experience like that where you just literally, it set you on a different path? Either it was a personal connection with an artist or a teacher, or maybe even just the work of an artist that kind of put you down a different path?
Non-stop. Yeah. I had my hero, I had trinities of heroes that I worship. So I grew up, this is kind of the question I was going to ask you guys. What's the recipe for Armand Baltazar? What's the recipe for Paul Tobin? Because it really, for me, it came from very specific ingredients, and they were chucked in the pot with whatever stock I gave. But it was Frank Frazetta and Norman Rockwell and James Bava who did all those amazing Doc Savage covers, and then went west and became a Western artist. And there was something about the three of those that drew me like a magnet. Now they're all oil painters, and I mostly use either watercolor or digital these days, but I was trained as a watercolorist. Hated it at the time, because I wanted to know oil paints, because my heroes were oil painters. But I was surrounded by great watercolorists. So watercolor is what I learned. And what I learned was, doesn't matter. It's not about the paint, it's how you think.
Yeah.
You look at a lot of artists who switch mediums, and it still looks like their work. And it's the way they register their lights and darks, and what combinations of earth reds and blues they will use, all sorts of stuff like that. So I had those growing up, and I had books. And I ate books alive bigger the better, or anything by Ray Bradbury. It just, I gobbled. And books were actually bigger inspiration for me than artists were. Not because I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer-artist and writer-artist filmmaker. But there was something about the words ignited the pictures in my head. It made me do the work to come up with the imagery for it. So they topped films any day because I had to make the pictures. I had to act the characters. I had to put the voices to them and all that. And I still, for me, that's the greatest thing in the world is a bunch of words, and you let me come up with the rest of it, right?
I completely agree. Yeah.
So then at 18, we moved over to Scotland. And I'd already been on my own for 4 years. So I'd had 4 years all by myself in a big house with no one looking after me, which my parents would be arrested for today. But they left me with a Bolex 16 millimeter camera, a reel-to-reel tape recorder with a microphone, and a Remington typewriter. So I made radio plays every week. I made a movie every month for 4 years. And I wrote Pulp Fiction by the ton. And it was just the best time ever. And because of that, I forgot to do drugs and go to parties and all that kind of stuff. But I had lots of friends because I needed extras and people to hold the cameras and stuff. So it was a great time. And then at 18, in 1974, my parents moved over to Scotland. So now I'm with family again, which was weird. And I'm suddenly in this very different country with a whole totally 180 different way of even running a school. Suddenly now we're wearing uniforms and we're behind barbed wire and you're beaten for speaking out and doing bad things even in your senior years. But they don't do that anymore. But it was really bizarre to go from running the school, because I was, I actually managed to, in one of my talks, I managed to throw out the presidential system and instate a triumvirate, because that was a better way to run the school. So when I go to Britain, it's like, no, you're a child. You will learn this way. So I quietly rebelled and so on, and had to find new heroes, because nobody in 1974, there was no internet. And there's no Norman Rockwell was, people forget, but he was not popular. Yeah. He was the leading light of his time, but then you tear those down so that the new can come in. So he was just looked on as kind of a chocolate box material, and nobody would be associated with him. But he didn't even make it across the ocean. People didn't really know him over there. And you couldn't find pictures from Frazetta. You couldn't find anything. So I had to find new heroes. And I discovered Arthur Rackham, and I discovered all the Pre-Raphaelites. Tons of European artists. That's where I found Mucha. And I just soaked up this older, different culture. Mobius, the Society of Humanité, all the French and European graphic novels. Oh my God, that I would never probably have seen, not for ages, over back in Canada. So I merged the two, and forevermore, for 10 years, I had their books, I had their pictures all over my drawing board. They were my North Stars. And there was one day when I was painting some grass, and it got as bad as, how does Rockwell paint grass? And I'm looking through his book trying to find some grass, and I look over the top of the book and there's a whole bunch of it outside. So I put the book down and I went outside with my paints and I painted grass for about an hour. And then I came back in, I put all the books away. And I haven't had an artist book open on my desk for about 30 years now.
Yeah.
Because I got to that point where I realized, oh, my answer for it, huh? Even if it's not theirs, even if it's not as amazing, it's mine. And that's why I think having that 10 years as an illustrator where I got to that point really transformed working in the film industry. Because now I'm the author, I'm the artist, I'm the one who makes the decision. When I offer that to a director, they don't want it. It doesn't mean it sucks. It doesn't mean it's bad. It means that doesn't fit their vision. I'm the one who decides whether it's good enough to offer and whether it had meaning for me. And that keeps you the actor, right? You have an identity as an artist when you join a collaborative medium. I think if you join a collaborative medium right from the beginning, you can get lost really easy. And your self-esteem, if you pin that to the decision of whether it's in the movie or not, good luck. Yeah. It's 95% is going to be tossed out.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, just quickly on that, because it was one of my most favorite experiences on a film. Was we'd barely started working on The Hobbit. It was with Guillermo del Toro. We were in a room with him. He was kind of more or less kind of introducing himself to us, and he said to us, we were showing him our first round of work, and he kind of made a real comment of, he very carefully went through all of the work, and then he sort of said to us, because he's an artist himself, and he sort of said to us, look, I will always be interested in seeing what you have to offer. If I'm not interested in it, or if I don't like it, that doesn't mean that it's not a good design or a good solution. It's just not right for what I need right now.
There you go.
And I was just like, that's the first time I had a director articulate that to us and to me as well. And we came out of that meeting just realizing that this was a director that was willing to allow us to actually fully explore some ideas without that fear of missing the mark potentially. Yeah. Obviously, you definitely get to a point in the project where you really do need to kind of sort of try to follow more of a strong lead. But it was really awesome to hear that was kind of his take on it as well. And I think partly because I think he's an artist too. I think he understands that process.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
absolutely. Cool. And what a gift, right?
Oh, it was amazing.
The directors, that's what they do. They gift you with all kinds of wonderful things.
Yeah. And the best ones all seem to have that quality. The best directors seem to want to surround themselves with people they inherently trust. They trust in your talent. They trust in your judgment, your taste. They don't necessarily, want every single thing you do as the right solution for like what you're saying, Paul, and you, Iain. But the thing is that when you're on a good production, and if the director has been in a place to be able to surround himself with the key artists that help influence his film, it's because you're doing something, or you bring something to the table that can ultimately add. A lot of stuff gets rejected, but
in the same way the actors are doing, right?
Right.
I mean, they cast that all the same kind of person because they need that mix of people on the screen. That's what in one of the art schools, friend of mine teaches that. He asks his class, what is the secret of life? And the answer is contrast. It's contrast that makes things interesting. It's contrast that draws your eye. It can be contrast of light and dark, or color and no color, or pattern and simplicity, but it's also contrast in types of people and so on. So very often building a team, making a movie, telling a story is about making sure you have the right range of contrasts in there. So your attention goes to the one spot you want them to look at first. But that also means it's a magic trick, because something they should be looking at, you can play off in the shadows and then bring it into that focus. It really allows you to orchestrate life. So a good team is exactly like a good piece of art. You've got to range your contrasts, and you've got to know how to make them work. I remember that on Star Wars. We had so many great artists that were showing portfolios when we were doing the prequels. And we couldn't use a lot of the ones that were the best painters and drawers. We needed the one that was right for the job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But then again, now we've got the problem of what happens when you go and do your own work. You're so wired to having some teammates there and a director and all this stuff, right? And if you're not lucky enough to have a 10-year career as an illustrator where you're the chooser, because actually these days is not like it was when I was there. You do a science fiction fantasy book and the art directors would go, I don't know, sure, draw it, that's great. They didn't know what, a field of 8-limbed aliens are going to look like. Today they do. Today they grew up in movies that showed stuff like that. And often they're really great artists too. And there's a lot of answers now for those kind of design questions. So the bar is a lot higher, I think.
Yeah.
Right. But back then, you were the art director, you were the director, you did whatever you wanted to do, more or less. Yeah. Right. So it fit the cover and had room for type.
And that all goes back to the time that you put into yourself, the time you invest in yourself will serve you well later, especially when you want to draw from that well, and to that question you asked, Iain, like I thought about that too as well. And the thing is that all those influences Iain talked about were so profoundly influential on me, from the comic book artist to the fantasy artist to then what other writers like Frank Herbert for me, and Dune was such an such a, big part of my life. Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. But, if I could just hone into just one particular artist that was an aha moment for me, I want to share that with you guys and with the audience. It was at the time when I was in art school, all I wanted to do, I was in oil painting. I wanted to be John Singer Sargent. I wanted to paint like John Singer Sargent and Zorn, right? And Kreuer and Serov and Ilya Repin. And I went, I'm going to oil paint. I'm going to oil paint. I'm going to oil paint. And if you even look in my website, there's some pieces from when I used to do gallery paintings of people. I was all into wanting to paint like Sargent or one of the Russians. And let me focus on Sargent for a moment. This was the big aha moment for me. There was a story my teacher told me about. He read in one of Sargent's diaries. And in the story, I did not know that John Singer Sargent was very close friends with an illustrator, really famous illustrator. I am totally now on the spot brain farting. Why can't I think of his name? He did beautiful
editing.
Fantastic Shakespearean. He did a big, fantastic Shakespearean set pieces. Anyways, it'll come to me. Anyways, it was one of his best friends, and he is an accomplished Edwin Austin Abbey. That's it. Edwin Austin Abbey, right? Did the big Shakespearean pieces, right? And Edwin Austin Abbey was going through a period when he was not making that much money. And Sargent goes to him, look, I can get you some portrait commissions. You can make a ton of money. You can be big and famous just like me. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, because Sargent probably didn't speak in that vernacular. And Edwin Austin Abbey goes, look, man, I love what you do and you're doing you. But me, I want to take these stories and I want to make images for those stories. You do you, I got to do me. If I don't end up being rich, that's okay because I'm doing me. And I remember hearing that story going, wow, it's okay to be an illustrator. And this guy thinks being an illustrator is pretty awesome because at the time when you go through a period of like being in love with John Singer Sargent, you're like, I have to be a painter, kind of thing. And I forgot that what Edwin Austin Abbey did resounded in me the way that N.C. Wyeth resounded in me, the way that Mobius resounded in me, or Frazetta, resounded in me, like these illustrators resounded in me. And I was like, man, I could be an illustrator. I could love that. And it's okay for me to love that. I don't have to be lofty. What is lofty? What matters is that I love it, right? And
you love it and that you're honest.
Yeah,
I think you can spot someone who's lying to you or not telling their truth a mile away.
Yeah.
Right, in their art and stories, it shows instantly. When you reach for a safe answer, they're lying. There's something there they're terrified to tell you that they think it's either going to look stupid or boring or frightening. You're going to hate them forever as a human being, and yet that's exactly what they need to dive into it and share. And that's the hard part, really. It's not learning to draw. It's what you do with it when you can draw.
Yeah.
I love it. You've got all soft focus, by the way, Armand. It's like there's tears in my eyes, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry. That's me. No, that's me sitting back and listening to their words. I was like, I was entranced,
You go all blurry. That's great.
Right. But maybe this is a perfect segue into where we are now, what we do now, what fuels us and lights us on fire now, because we've been doing films for a while. We continue to do so, but there's also, it seems, when I look over to my left, I look over down below or wherever you guys happen to be situated in Zoom, I see three people that basically share that same sort of thing. And it's that scary thing, that scary threshold of like, I have my job, I'm doing art, I'm doing great. I've got this itch. I've got to scratch it. I've got to make something. It might fail. People might think, well, you know what? Who cares what people think? And maybe that's the thing that separates a lot of people is they come to that threshold and they go, all those things that make me scared keep me from crossing that line. Versus maybe the three of us are looking at that line going, it's like hopscotch. Woo, this is the next part of the game. I'm going to jump over the line, go to the next one, jump over that line, go to the next one, right?
But isn't that why we love teaching too? Because we know that's not built into the three of us. It's built into everybody.
Yeah.
You can all be brave enough to cross that line. You just need to know how to approach it and how to conquer your inner critics or fire them if you need to. You need to know how to find who you are so you can even share it. And that's a practical thing. There's things you can do, right? And the nice thing is, it is really hard work for the rest of your life. That's the magic juice. And yet you already do it and you don't work at it at all. Every single night you create great stories, great characters, well lit, greatly, beautifully animated, right? Great dialogue sometimes in your dreams. And you didn't work at that. You didn't have to learn dream skills to make any of that happen. So you already have that ability. You just have to learn to do it while you're awake. And that's where the work comes in, getting out of your own way. So we love to teach that, right?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
It's I think
Absolutely.
yeah. It's I think one of the best bits of advice I got from you, Iain, when I would sort of catch up with you maybe once a year or so. But I think for me, one of the things that I really took to heart was to sort of try to become more of a storyteller. I think at the time I was very, very design focused. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because I've spent my whole, life in film, just about career in film, telling, making stories come to life. Right. But it's been other people's stories. And I think as much as I've sort of done a little bit of writing, I remember you sort of saying you need to start to write more and all the time. And I think part of that, crossing that line for at least me, has been the ability to start to stop drawing and actually start to write. And it's not that I'm showing much at the moment, but I think for me, that was a big part of it for me, was the ability to start to kind of try to dip into writing more so that I have something. Because I think that you were talking about, we all loved illustrators, right? That's one of the common things, is that we loved reading a book and then bringing that book to life. That was the excitement for us. We read these words and all of a sudden things are going off in our head. We're visualizing it and we're wanting to bring it to life. Well, if we're doing our own stories, we need those words first. And I guess as one of the things I was very impressed with you, Armand, is the fact that you are able to just sit down, carve off time from somewhere, and then write this huge story, but then also take on this task of actually illustrating it as well. And I mean, I'm not at that part yet. Like, I've barely started the writing. But how is that process of switching gears from spending your whole time drawing to then going into writing? What is it, a 500-page novel? I mean, it's not a small undertaking, right?
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, it was two things at the exact same time and in the exact same proportion, of absolute stark raving terror and absolute stark raving exhilaration and joy, because the thing is that, it's sort of like, when you're not using something, it atrophies, right? And that can be your creativity. It can also be your voice. When I was young, I had no fear of telling this story. Even when I wrote some stories in high school, just because I loved reading stories and I wanted to make my own, and I did. I remember at the time when I was in high school, I was big into horror novelists, like so many. I was into like Stephen King, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to write the next great creepy story, and I loved it, kind of thing. But I decided to flex my art muscle more because I loved that. And so I did. And so when I got challenged to write by my son, at first I was exhilarated and I was terrified because I hadn't done well. And I was filled with fears, like everyone is when they're doing something that is new or they haven't done in a while. But the thing is about writing that is, in a sense, exactly the same way it's terrifying about drawing. But here's the difference. I'll spell out in a second. When you write words on a page, and if you're honest, as Iain says, it's coming out of you, and what you see is coming out of you, unfiltered, unchecked, and there it is. And if you're honest with yourself, you're either thinking, this is the most greatest thing you've ever seen and read ever, or you are going, oh my God, this is the most god-awful thing ever.
Or you go, oh, I can't tell people that. What will they think?
Or it's a little bit of both. And maybe the truth of it is somewhere in the middle, because what the thing is, if you haven't drawn in 20 years and then you pick up a pencil and start drawing, it probably won't be very good, but the more you do it, the better it becomes, right? And so it was scary. And what happened was writing saved my life. I mean, making that book saved my life. How did I make a 500-page book? How did I illustrate all those illustrations? Everyone has their own particular things that happen in their life. And that particular moment in my life, for some reason, I felt like I was lost. It was like what Iain was talking about earlier, where, I've been doing all these things. I should be happy. I've got this career, but why am I not? Right. And that's what I was facing at the time when I made this book. And because when I made that book and when my son asked me to make that book, I looked in the mirror and said, there's something that I could be that I haven't looked in the mirror and accepted the responsibility of doing that, because it's going to be hard. And at that moment, I said, I got to find out. Like, once I opened Pandora's box, or I opened that door, or the lamp was there saying, rub me. I had to, I was like, God, for me telling myself I can make a story, there was a moment where I crossed over that line and said, I think I can do it. And now I have to just, like I was telling you guys earlier, this thing with Iain McCaig and going skiing with Iain McCaig. This is my metaphor in life. Going skiing with Iain McCaig, crossing over the crest of the hill. It's a black diamond. I don't know what's going to happen, but Iain has, I know I'm going to follow Iain, right? So that's what it was like.
I remember
I was like, I crossed over that edge. Like, you're working on this fantastic project. You and I have been talking about your project for a while. And the thing is, you're crossing that edge. So I know what you're going through. And I would I'd be lying to you if I told you, like, oh yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be easy. You're going to be coasting. Those long hours won't feel like anything because you're having so much joy. No, you know what you're going to be doing? You're going to be feeling everything 10 times more. And that's the best part of it, because you care about it, man. And you're seeing for the first time in a long time, maybe, what you're capable of. And then parts where you're like, okay, I need to improve that. But this is where you don't beat yourself up and you go, all right, cool, man, bring it. I'm gonna
bring it on.
Next part. Yeah.
One bit of advice I got from an author, one of my favorite authors, very close friends, Terry Windley. It was a long time back, but I was writing screenplays. I've written a lot of them now. I've written about 15 of them. But back then I was still just starting, and I really, really wanted to write a masterpiece screenplay for one of her series of books. And I remember telling her over lunch, God, I would give anything to be the kind of writer I want to be. And she said, that's why you can't write. And that took me a little while to figure out. Like, what? That's good, because it's like a Gandalf thing, but what? And sometimes, like, wanting to write is like wanting to be a good artist. It's not about being a good artist or being a writer. It's what you write and what you draw and what you do with your art. So it's like, just imagine you are a good artist or you are a good writer. What are you going to do with it? And it's communicating the thing you want to do, not the tool that lets you communicate it, that makes the communication better. Because it has to be. It has to be. If what you want to do most is talk about Atlantis, you need to have your skills at a certain level. That doesn't mean you sit and practice your skills until you think you can tell that story. You tell it now. That's how you get better. And then you read it, and you don't read to see if it's any good. You hand it to someone to see if they even understood what you said. Right? Is what was in your head on the page. Just do that. So being clear, being communicating the passion that you feel for this in your words matters more than whether you really are using sentences in the very best possible way. That will come because it's necessary to communicate clearly, but it shouldn't be the other way around. So just sitting, becoming a good writer doesn't get you anywhere. Writing something good does, or writing something that communicates does. And then writing 100 of them makes you a good writer.
Well, that's a big part of it, isn't it? You've just got to keep throwing yourself back at it again and again. I mean, I think that's definitely something, that we've all experienced a lot in the film industry, is that you just have to keep constantly coming up with ideas and throwing them up against the wall and hoping something's going to stick. And I think that kind of iterative, you become very good at not getting too precious around anything, right? And I think that's another great thing about doing your time in the industry. That's one of those great things about if you're fortunate enough to get into the industry and have that experience. You do, you go through that period of time where you're very, very invested and very precious. And I think being invested is actually really important. I remember someone telling me when I was first in the industry, don't get too invested, because it was painful, right? Like I was getting my ideas were getting shot down and I was getting upset. And they said, don't get invested, don't get too invested. And I was like, but I don't think I can do good work unless I've got to be invested. I guess what I need to do is just learn to become a little bit better at accepting that idea wasn't the right idea. And I just need to challenge myself to come up with a better idea and to keep coming up with better ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great things about being in that part of the industry is that, you learn to be able to just keep trying to throw yourself at something and not let failure grind you down. You've just got to keep going. And I think
because that's not failure.
No, tenacity.
It's a beautiful thing on the menu that they didn't decide to order that day.
That's right.
That's all. But that's an important thing too, right? If you're designing anything, do not put it out there because you think maybe they'll like it. Maybe this will be the right solution. You only put something out there that you love, that you want on that menu, that you want someone to enjoy, right? Because otherwise they're going to pick the one that you didn't, right? And if you designed it, you have to live with that. You have to live with the fact that you made a terrible dessert and and that piece of crap on the screen, that's you.
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes you got to make that terrible dessert, you do. But,
no,
I mean, you do.
Disagree. You do not. You never need to do that, ever, even if they ask for it.
Right.
I would not do it. Then I would say, this is not the project for me. You need to find an artist who makes terrible desserts.
What I meant by that was that sometimes you make a dessert that you think, man, this is great. It tastes good to me, but it may not taste good to somebody else. It doesn't mean it's terrible. I'm trying to harken back to the thing that Iain was talking about before, because working in our industry, so much of how we try to internally gauge if we're doing well at our job is getting designs through. Is it approved? Is it being used? Are they, wanting to use my skills, right? And of course, there's a certain amount of that has true. You have to be contributing and useful. But what Iain says is also vitally true, especially in this part of our lives where we're at right now, which is you have to be able to recognize when you've created something that is truly meaningful or truly something that is sound, and it's sound to you, and maybe it's not being used. God, I won't name names, but I worked on a film recently where I designed a whole bunch of vehicles, and I kept pushing me to design stuff like what I do in my personal work for Timeless. And I kind of fought it, but I did it. And in the end, they're like, no, that's totally wrong for us. I'm like going, but it's right for me. It's right for me. I'm like going,
you get it just like that. That's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did in my internal voice, my external voice was like, I'll try something else. But my internal voice was like, yes.
No, turn that voice on next time.
But all that stuff, man. I mean, that's you bring something of value to your stuff, and everything, all the times that we've spent honing these, my gosh, what an amazing blessing it's been to work with these people who have not only in trying to make stuff for them, help them, but it's asked us to grow internally, and become
I would
better.
say, remember that when you're the one who's directing and assigning things and all that kind of stuff, do the Del Toro. Remember to reach out to the people that are working with you and nurture and grow them, because that makes you stronger too, right? And I think that's the final part of mastery is you must teach. You don't teach because you're a master. You teach to learn what your mastery is. I like to say that we spend our lifetime learning what to leave out in a drawing. But you'll forget it's there if you don't have to teach it to start with, right? Yeah. So that's teaching is it's a gift to the teacher as well as it is to the students. It's because it makes us go back to our basics and remember what we're leaving out and why. So, by the way, I was going to recommend, I think it's time to open this up to our audience. Let them ask some questions.
I think you're right.
Hopefully they're all like sitting there going, yes, let's make some stories.
So our faces will stop moving, the lips, but we will have some images up, and the three of us will be here live to answer your questions and talk with you in the chat.
Sounds great.
Okay,
Thank you. Thanks for coming. And let's go do some good stuff. Ask some good questions. You're right.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in the chat.